And just for some context, the Knowledge Mobilization Unit at York works across campus with all faculty, staff, and students to provide knowledge mobilization support services. And one of those tasks that I've kind of taken on over the years is around the use of social media and knowledge mobilization, and helping our researchers to plan for how they can use social media as one way to connect with potential research partners, potential research knowledge users, and a way to kind of get their research out there. So I'm going to be going over the social media strategy building tools that I use. So I'm going to walk you through some of the main sort of topics that we would cover. And then I'm gonna, within that, I'll share some examples because I find it's a little bit easier to understand how this stuff works in practice. And get to hear some stories. And then I'll share some of the frequently asked questions that I get asked from researchers. And then I'll have time for a Q&A, so if there's anything that you want to ask specifically. So I'm just gonna get right into it. So in terms of building a social media strategy, these are the points that I tend to cover when I meet with faculty or grad students. And I do have this as a Word document. It's a sort of a fillable table. If you're interested in it, just let me know and I send it out to people. And what I do is I'll print it out and I'll get people together. If it's a researcher, if it's an individual researcher, I just we meet one-on-one. If they have a whole team, we kind of ask everyone to bring the team together. And so this usually happens ideally before teams are applying for grants so that they have a sense of what this is going to look like in the future. But sometimes it's a bit too early. They don't quite know what their exact activities are. So I'll meet with them before they submit an application to just kind of discuss broadly how they can be using social media as a dissemination tool. And then after the grant is awarded, that's when we really sit down and hammer out this plan moving forward for the life of the project. And we'll often meet, if it's a larger scale project that goes for a number of years, I'll meet with them throughout the life of the project to kind of just touch base with them on how things are going. Because one of the things I'll probably mention a few times as I go through this is what tools they're using kind of depends on where they are in the project. So if it's at the very beginning, they may want more internal tools like, say, MS Teams or Dropbox as a way to just share information amongst themselves, as opposed to kind of later stages where they're ready to release research results and disseminate in a cool way using social media. So I'm just going to go through each one of these items and talk a bit more about it. So the first thing that I get people to think about is who's going to be doing social media on your team. If it's just a single researcher or a grad student that I'm meeting with, then it's them. They're the whole team, and that's fine. If it's a research project, you might have a PI, you might have some other researchers, you might have grad students, you might have coordinators. I ask everybody to kind of come to the table and really talk honestly about who's going to do this, and very specifically, like who's going to write the content, who's going to write up the posts, say, on Facebook and press publish, and who's going to monitor Facebook in case there are questions or comments, that kind of thing. One thing I hear a lot, especially with the larger grants and research projects, is that, oh, I have a grad student who will do this. And that's great. But you have to make sure that, just because people are, younger than you doesn't mean that they necessarily know how to use social media in a strategic, professional way. They may be used to using it in their personal lives, but it's a bit different when you're talking about using social media for a research project. The other thing is graduate students graduate, hopefully, and so they're not around for very long, and you need that continuity. So if they go, or if you have different grad students every semester, that's fine, but you need somebody kind of overarching who's making sure that there's continuity throughout the life of the project. And make sure that people have time to do this, because it seems like it's easy and it doesn't take that much time, but to do it effectively takes a lot of time. And often I hear, oh, our coordinator can do that. you know, on top of everything else that they have to do. Just make sure that they do have time to do it effectively and that they're enthusiastic about it. When I meet with people and they tell me, you know, I'm not on social media myself personally, I don't like it, I don't enjoy it, I don't understand it, that's kind of the end of the conversation for me. And we talk about other strategies, like maybe they could concentrate their efforts on creating some really good knowledge products that their partners could disseminate through their social media channels. I think it comes across online. I think we've all been to, you know, that we've been to enough sites that we know that some are more enthusiastic and better than others, and it kind of comes through if you're not really into it. So that's kind of the main issues there in terms of the team, is just being very clear and setting it out, who's going to do what. Doesn't have to be all one person. You could have, say, the researchers are writing the content, and then you've got maybe grad students do more of the posting and monitoring, but just being very clear about who's doing what, so that you're not kind of caught in a situation where, you know, oh, we haven't posted in a couple of weeks. Well, that's because so-and-so's away, that kind of thing. So after we decide who's going to be doing this, really think about your goals. What are you hoping to accomplish? What are the goals for your social media presence? Why are you doing this in the first place? I think a lot of people feel like they have to. It's just something else. It's because social media has become so common and popular. They feel like that's the thing that has to be done. Again, really thinking about, does it meet the goals of your research project, especially if it's a funded, it's a grant that you're working on, thinking about what are the overarching goals for that research project. Does that match with what you're hoping to do with social media? And if it doesn't, then you might want to rethink that. And so depending on what you're trying to do, whether that's communicate your research results, maybe connect with people online in certain target groups, that kind of dictates what types of content you're going to share and also what kind of tools you're looking to use. So say if you're just trying to, you know, create awareness and maybe build up a community around your research topic, then you might want to be more conversational and invite people to kind of comment on your work and that kind of thing, as opposed to if it's more about getting the results out there, you have research results that you feel would be useful to disseminate, then you're going to put, I think, a little bit more effort into what those products look like and creating a nice communication strategy to get those results out. And so one thing to keep in mind is that you might have multiple goals, especially if it's a larger scale project. And so you'll need to think about which tools you're going to use to target each of those goals. So say you want to do all of that. You want to connect with people and disseminate research. You might need to use Twitter for one thing, Instagram for something else, Facebook for something, and they all kind of need their own strategy because they're different tools. They look a little different. The types of things that are posted on each of those platforms is different. So you'll need to think thoroughly about what you're sharing, where, and how you're sharing it. I'll go into more about that when I talk about content and show you some examples of what that can look like. But just, again, it gives you an idea that this isn't just, it's not just as simple as, oh, we'll tweet once a week. You need a more fulsome plan about what that's going to look like and what kind of content you're going to share if you want to do this right. Next up is thinking about those people that you're trying to reach. Who's the audience? And maybe it's multiple audiences, and being very clear about the different audience groups that you're trying to target. And those, most likely, if you've written a grant proposal for this or done a research design, you already have this in mind, who are the target groups. But again, we get people, when I meet with them, to really think through what each of those groups are. And because that will help you to tailor your content. So if one of your audience groups is other researchers, then you might want to be on Twitter because that seems to be the place where researchers like to hang out. And that's where a lot of people share citations to their recent publications. Really good for research sharing, but also for having conversations. If you're trying to reach sort of what we often say general public, which is usually way too general. Say you're trying to a certain select group within the general public, so say seniors, or you're trying to reach youth, then you're going to want to go to where they are, so maybe more Instagram or Facebook, and share things that are appropriate for those platforms. So things that are more visual, maybe you want to share videos, that kind of thing. So being very clear about what those different audience groups are. And if you have a lot of audience groups, but you don't have a lot of time to do social media, you might want to just target one of them to start. So what's your highest priority? And target just that one group and spend most of your time at the beginning trying to do that effectively. I find too often people feel a pressure to kind of be everywhere, especially if they're trying to reach a wide audience. And it just becomes too much. And what people tend to do then is, they write one post, they put it on Twitter, kind of like copy paste it, put it on Facebook, copy paste it on Instagram, and it doesn't really work that way. They have to be slightly different because the platforms are different, and the people that go on there are expecting to see specific types of content. And you can kind of tell when people have just copy pasted from other platforms. And then one important thing that I try to remind people is, depending on what your goals are for the project and who you're trying to reach and what your time frame is, you might not need to develop your own social media platforms. That seems to be the default. Everyone wants to build their own following on each platform, and that's fine. But it's not always necessary. So a couple years ago, a researcher here at York came to me, and she's in philosophy, and she looks a lot into justice issues. And she was working on a project that was looking at men who just recently left the prison system. And she wanted to reach out to them to be a part of this new research project that she was getting going on. And so we chatted a bit about how she could use social media to target this group, to invite them to be part of the research project, but then also afterwards to kind of share the results from the research when she was done. So through the course of going through this worksheet, I realized that she knew where they were. They were on Facebook. She knew that they were quite heavy users of Facebook. She had her goals and all that. But the thing was, she really only needed to be on social media for about 6 months. Because once she had people in the research project, she was going to kind of go quiet until she was done the research, and then she would probably jump back on at the end and share the research results. And so we chatted about, all the time and effort it was going to take her to develop her own Facebook page, try to attract the attention of the people that she was hoping to reach, get them to follow her, all that kind of stuff, just to kind of shut it down in 6 months. It didn't really make sense that she would put the effort into that for such a short time period. So we chatted a bit more, and turned out one of the partners on the research project was the John Howard Society, which works with men who've recently been incarcerated. And they have a huge Facebook following. That's where her prime target audience were. They were already a part of John Howard Society's Facebook page. So we decided in the end, instead of her spending the time trying to target those people that she wanted to, she would spend the time crafting posts and content that she would ask her partners to post kind of on her behalf. And that's something that I try to remind people, is to use the partnerships that you have for the project, or that within the communities that you're trying to reach. Just like if you were having an event in real life, you would try to ask people to spread the word for you. You can do the same thing online. If you know them well, you can ask them, could your communications people send out these messages? You can work with them to make sure that it meets if they have communications and branding requirements, meet their needs, meet your needs. And then you're not spending all kinds of time trying to build up this following. And then just to kind of go quiet on people, which is also not ideal. If you bring people into a group, there's an expectation that that's going to continue, and that's going to be an ongoing community. So it doesn't work very well if you're just doing it for a short period of time. So next is what I call the current conversation. So I find when I meet with people and we're talking about social media, most people already have an idea of what type of platform they want to be on. So they think, well, I feel like we should have a Twitter feed, or, I think we should start a Facebook page for this project. And it's good to have an idea, but you need to go where people are. It's not a case of build it and they will come. Just because you can have the best looking Facebook page and the coolest Instagram feed, but if the people you're trying to target are not using those platforms, you're kind of wasting your time. So this is where doing a bit of an environmental scan comes in handy. If you don't know where your audience members are already, you need to spend some time trolling through social media sites, going on Google, looking at where that audience groups tends to congregate. And it changes over time, which can be the tricky thing, especially if you're trying to target younger people. Facebook, I know, is totally out. None of them use it. Now I don't know, I think it's TikTok is the most recent one. I think even Instagram is getting old, depending on if you're talking, young teenagers. So you'll need to do a little bit of searching around to see where they are and once you do that, once you find them, it's good to get a sense of, okay, what kind of content seems to resonate with this group of people? Do they seem to really like images? Do they like videos? Are they fine with more kind of long form writing? It will really depend on the group that you're trying to target, but having an idea of first where they are so that you can be there too, and then you're not spending your time building up a platform that no one's going to come to. And also thinking about what kind of content they like to consume so that you can kind of emulate that as well and design tools that that people are more likely to use and are going to like. And then after you've done all that, that's when I think you really kind of nail down which tools you're going to use. Once you know your goals, your audience, where people are, that's when you can make that final decision on which tools you're going to spend your time developing and maintaining. And as it says here, I think at the beginning, it's often best to just pick one or two and do them really well instead of trying to be everywhere. What you can do though is sort of plan for the future. This particularly works well if it's a larger scale or a long-term project. You can kind of map it out. So say, the first year we're going to be here, and then once we have this certain amount of content, we can move into other sites. Now, if you've got a larger team, that you might be able to do all of those sites all at once. It just depends on kind of the time and energy that you have. And I know this is often when I talk with researchers, this kind of makes them feel a little bit more comfortable about using social media. As I think they're, oftentimes I've had people come to me and they feel like they need to be on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn all at once and manage all of them. And when I tell them, I think it's best to just pick one at the beginning and do it really well and see how you feel about it. And if you have the time and the energy and the resources to branch out, then by all means do that when you're comfortable. And I think I've been in the room a couple times where I've seen them visibly exhale, and think, okay, this is now something that I can do because it's a bit more manageable. And I think mapping out these tools over the time, especially if it's a long-term project, kind of helps you plan for what's coming up and where you're going to put your energy. This is a table that I came up with. This is just my own opinion. You might have different opinions than me. But looking at the different types of tools and what I think they tend to work best for. So blogging, which is becoming a little bit passe. I know it's not as popular as it was. I still read blogs, but I have to say even I have moved more to Instagram as opposed to just reading people's blogs. But I still think there's a lot of potential there for storytelling, resource sharing, and disseminating your research, especially if you want to do more long form writing. It's a place to do that. Facebook is still, I think, good for everywhere, for all of these items. The only thing with Facebook people don't like, well, there's a lot of things, but they have a tendency to change how things work. So, you know, maybe a Facebook page looks like this, and then in 6 months they're going to change it around, and you've spent all this energy making it look nice, and then you have to redo it. The other thing is with Facebook is just because you post something does not mean that your followers are going to see it. In fact, very few will see it. They have these secret algorithms that they don't explain what they are, that are supposed to curate content for people, but I think personally, my jaded opinion is that it's just to encourage you to spend money to boost your posts, which is not always a terrible idea. I do tell people if they have some budget and they're trying to target specific people, especially if they have events that they would like people to come to, or if they've got reports that they would really like people to read, spending a bit of money to boost a post, which means you set a budget for how much money you want to spend, and it will ensure that your post gets into people's feeds, or else it can appear, if you're on Facebook, on the right-hand side of your screen, there's the ads there. And I do know researchers who've done this, spent a bit of money on this, and have had great success. So if that's something you're comfortable with, that's an idea to keep in mind. Instagram is become very popular in the last couple of years. It's still a little bit early days in terms of academic research. I know of a couple individual researchers and a couple of projects that are using it. It can be great if you have visuals that you want to share. Depending on the type of research, this is easier than others. But I think there's a lot of potential there. Our Associate Vice President here at York, Celia Haig-Brown, she does a lot of documentary film with her research projects, and she's got an upcoming project on women in rodeo, and I'm trying to convince her to use Instagram for that. She says she's on board, but we'll see. LinkedIn is still really the place to be for careers and jobs. It's, you know, your online CV, but I think the LinkedIn groups are quite good for networking and resource sharing as well. Pinterest is getting a little bit older. It's not as popular as it used to be, but I still think there are certain groups. I've heard that teachers are they use Pinterest quite a lot for lesson planning and that kind of thing. So if you're targeting educators, that might be a good place to be. I get asked a lot about ResearchGate and academia.edu. These are kind of like LinkedIn for academics. So there's a place where you can share a profile, you can share your recent publications, list your citations, that kind of thing. If you're an academic researcher, I think it's important to have profiles on one or both of them. If you're not an academic yourself, or if it's just more of from a project point of view, I don't know. I'm not as convinced about that, but we'll see. Twitter is still quite popular and is still kind of a meeting place for academics. And then YouTube, I'm sure we've all noticed that videos have become much more popular over the years. And they don't need to be super professional anymore, and you can take very good videos just with your phone. So I think that kind of cuts down on a lot of the barriers to entering there. And I think, so if you're able to and you're comfortable with creating short videos, they have to be under 3 minutes maximum. Now, attention spans are very, very short. That might be a good piece of content to share. And there's also, if you're not comfortable with YouTube, there's also Vimeo, which is not as well known, but I know a lot of researchers use that. I think there's less instance of trolling and the horrible comments. So that's those about tools. So moving into content, what you're actually going to share. And so what I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to share an example here, is about the concept in communications called layering. And so this is, and it's a whole other conversation, but I'll just get into it briefly. And that's the idea that you have one piece of research that you've done. Maybe you've done a research project, and then out of that, you're looking at all the different formats that you can create products around to represent what's in that piece of research. So you've done your project, you've got your academic journal, then you're also doing maybe a report that's aimed at policymakers. Maybe you're doing a research summary, maybe you're doing a video, all related to that one research project, that one piece of research that you've done. And it's really about trying to target different audiences depending on what types of content they like to read and consume, but also making that research project stretch more. So instead of just tweeting once about the project and, oh, here's the link to my latest academic journal, you're kind of getting more mileage out of that. So I'll show you an example of that in a second. But content is something that I do discuss with teams. We talk about this a fair bit. What are you going to share? And I think it's a good idea to have an idea before you sort of jump onto the platforms is what types of information are you going to share? And I find breaking it out into categories kind of helps you wrap your head around, okay, what are we going to share? Because I think sometimes that can be a struggle. You know, at the beginning, it's exciting, you've got ideas, and then 6 months in, it's like, okay, now what? So thinking about, you know, do you have events? Are you taking photos that you can share? Are you releasing reports? Sometimes especially when I talk with projects or organized research units, they have tons of content already. It's just about maybe redoing it so that it's more appropriate for sharing on social media. So talking about that, I think early on will help you plan so that when you're going through the project, you're kind of planning in advance. Okay, we're gonna need content to share on Facebook. So what is that gonna look like, and who's gonna craft that, and who's gonna post it? So I'm going to share an example from one of our research projects here at York, the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, which is also known as the Homeless Hub. They are kind of the gold standard for how to use social media for research and knowledge mobilization. I should point out that they have a very large team, very large. I'm trying to think how else as I talk to them. I think I'd say at least 4 people that do just communications, full-time people. And they have programming backgrounds as well as graphic design backgrounds, so very highly skilled. They also have a lot of research money behind them. They've been very successful with grants. So this is kind of like if you've got the large team and you've got a lot of money and you've got the mandate to do it, this is kind of how you should be doing it. If you're an individual researcher or if you just have a small grant, I still think you can kind of emulate their model. It may be, and there are tools online that you can use, like say some of the online infographic tools like Piktochart and Venage that you can use pretty easily to create content that looks really nice. Canva is another one that I've heard people use. I can, if anyone wants those links, just let me know and I'll send them out. So this is a research study that they did last year. It's still on their website if you go there. So this is the web page for the roadmap for the prevention of youth homelessness. So they've got a web page here, and it links to all the other different content you can see on the right-hand side there, and they've got a series of reports. So, and you can notice, just keep an eye out for the color schemes and everything, because they continue that through all their content. So they've got the website, the web page, which then links to this 188-page research report. So this is aimed at people who, are very into the topic and want to read the in-depth report on what the research was. But they also have a 16-page executive summary. So if you don't have quite as much time or desire that much, you can do this. They also create infographics for pretty much all of their research projects. So here they've taken out sort of the 6 kind of key themes that have come out of the research and created this infographic. And I love it because it's called the Roadmap for Prevention, and it's got this little road imagery. This, I know they do all the, they create all these icons themselves. I'm pretty sure they use like Adobe creative suite. So again, like you've got to have the skills to do this from scratch, but there are tools online that could help you do a lot of this stuff where you can bring in icons that have already been made and do that. And then you'll notice the way each one of these themes, they're in kind of their own little box. So these would be really easy to share. Each one of these 6 images could be an image that you share on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. And so they've got this Facebook post, and Facebook is kind of, people say it's sort of in between a tweet and a blog post. You have more words than you do on Twitter, but you're not going to write as much as you would say on a blog post. But you can say a fair bit in a Facebook post, and they've linked to the report, and then they've got this nice image that's a pull quote from one of the interviewees. And then this is what the same thing looks like as a tweet. So very similar, but a bit shorter, you can see. And they have tagged the at Away Home Canada. That's one of their main partners on the project. And they've added hashtags. You can add hashtags in Facebook posts as well. And then this is another tweet that they've used. So again, similar kind of colors, but so it's similar content, but they've just presented it differently. And then this is the Instagram post. So even less words, more emojis, and the use of hashtags as well, which can be hashtags. One thing I get asked about a bit is how you need to do a bit of research about which ones people are using, and where you can, there's some, if you look online, if you're interested, I can look it up and send it to you about, you know, what it changes all the time, but what the kind of current best practices about how many hashtags to use, where to put them in your post, all that kind of stuff. And then they do a webinar for each of their research reports, and they've recorded them and put this on Vimeo. And then they've recently started podcasting as well. They've got a couple episodes, and they use SoundCloud for their, this is a different research project, but just to give you an example. So this whole thing is what layering is this one, out of one piece of research, you get all these different formats of content that all kind of link back to the same content. So again, if you're just a single researcher or a smaller team, you can still do some of this. You know, if you've got your academic paper, you can think about what would that look like as a 2-page summary. Is there a way that you can put together an infographic based on some of your findings? And then once you've got those kind of visuals, can you post those visuals on your social media platforms? Okay, so once you've got all that, measuring success. So how do you know, how will you know when you're being successful? And this is something that you need to measure throughout the life of the project. And different ways to measure are things like increased traffic to your website. Maybe you have a lot of likes and shares. But I think, and it's easy to count that kind of stuff. It's easy to think about, you know, how many followers you've had, your increase in followers, the number of shares and likes. But it's also, I think, more than just the numbers, is tracking things like, are people having conversations on your post? Are people sharing it with other people? Do you feel like there's more general awareness? There are tools out there, like if you use Twitter or Facebook, they have built-in analytics that can show you which are your most popular posts. And they tend to be ones with pictures, just from my own personal experience, and pictures of people. People seem to like that more so than, you know, landscape or nature pictures. People tend to like pictures of other people, or cats, of course. I always tell people, sort of jokingly, but also seriously, if you can work in cats, or cat videos, or baby goats into your social media posts, do it, because people love that stuff. And there is kind of, the thing about social media is there is a bit of room to be a bit more kind of fun and lighthearted, if that makes sense for your research topic. It's not always appropriate, but if it is, I think social media gives you a chance to kind of be a little bit more casual and personable with people that you're sharing with. So measuring success, I see as more of as an ongoing, something that you're going to be doing, say once a month, you're going to be reporting on as a team. And then I'm just going to skip ahead because I'm going to talk about evaluation, which is more of a longer term thing. So every month you're looking at your stats. Okay, what's been popular? It will tell you and what people like, what doesn't really work. And then on a sort of semi-annual or annual basis, I think it's a good idea to get the team together to really look at those stats and look at what's working, what's not working, what do we need to change, are there new tools that we could be using or not. And then one thing that a lot of projects don't think about, and always tends to surprise people when I bring this up, is what are you going to do when the project is over? Especially if it's funded research. If you're done with the project, the articles have been published, you presented at the conferences, everything's good, you're moving on to another topic. What do you do with that Facebook page that's maybe been going for a couple of years? Do you shut it down? Do you leave it up as an archive but let people know that you're not really actively monitoring it? Do you ask one of your partners to take it over? Those are all options, and I think it's better to think about that at the front end and have an idea of what you're going to be doing than kind of pull the plug on people at the last minute at the end. And so this ongoing evaluation really should be part of your strategy, and you need to think about how often you're going to do that evaluation. So I'll just jump back quickly just to briefly, pick a name that you might want to do a bit of research to make sure it hasn't already been taken or that it's not aligned. If it has been, if there's something similar, it's you make sure that you still stand out, and use the same name across platforms if you can, so people know how to find you. And this is less of an issue than it used to be, but make sure that you've got a nice look to it. If you can create a logo that works well. If you don't have a logo, even just using the same kind of color scheme across platforms is helpful, just to create a bit of a visual identity for yourself. Okay, so and lastly, before we get to the Q&A, just going to share a couple of the questions that I get asked quite often. One is, how much should I share? And I often get this question from graduate students or individual faculty, especially early career. People are a little bit concerned about maybe sharing too much of their research. I know in certain disciplines there can be some danger of being scooped, or and I tend to be pretty conservative about this. If you're not comfortable, if you kind of envision, if somebody misconstrued what I said, or if somebody was to steal my research, that would be detrimental to my career, which it can be, then I tend to tell people to don't go there then. Once you put something online, it's pretty much impossible to get it back. So I think you need to be careful and thoughtful about what you share. And it doesn't mean that you can't be on social media. It just means you need to think about what you're willing to share. And maybe you're not willing yet. So maybe you're still in the middle of the project. I know sometimes people are concerned that if they write about their project online, that publishers won't want to publish their work. So if that's the case, maybe wait until that publication has been accepted and it's online, and then you can talk about it. It's really up to you, but it is something to think about. When I have research teams come to me, they often ask, should we be posting as individuals or as a team? So if they've got a Twitter feed, should it be like Dr. So-and-so, or should it be, this research project? There's really not one answer to that. It really depends on what works for you. Some researchers I know are quite active on social media, so it makes sense for them they already have a social media presence and they already have a following, so it makes sense for them to post as an individual. For others, they're only using social media for a limited amount of time and only on a specific project. So they might not be tweeting on a daily basis, but they might tweet, once or twice a week about the project. In that case, I think it makes more sense to tweet as the project. And you can either, if you've got a team of people who are, say, tweeting, you can identify who those people are, maybe with an initial or not. It's really up to you. I think there's a way to kind of create a common voice for one of those team feeds. And then another thing that tends to come up is, how do we get more followers? How do we actually get people to notice our stuff online? And this takes time. It does sometimes just take time. And the best way is to create compelling content and create and post things that people are going to want to look at and going to want to share. The other thing you really want to make sure you're doing is connecting with other people online. If there are other groups or individuals that you think would be interested in your content, make sure you're following them, make sure you're liking their materials, you're sharing their content, because they're more likely to then follow you and share your stuff back again. And you have to think about that reciprocity. Too often I've seen, this doesn't seem to happen years ago, where researchers would get on Twitter and basically use it like email. If you went to their feed, all the tweets were just them, and they were just posting their own stuff. They weren't sharing anybody else's. They weren't sharing, resources or newspaper articles or anything. And it doesn't work, because if you're going to do that, you might as well just email it out. You need to kind of create that community and create that back and forth and that sharing. And that's what social media is all about, is getting that multiplicity kind of idea. I share it with one person. Say they have, 100 followers, and then one of those people has 1,000 followers and they share it, and so on and so on. And that's how things kind of get out there. I also tell people, don't obsess too much about the number of followers you have. I think it's better to have a smaller number of engaged followers who actively comment and share and like your stuff, as opposed to having, thousands of people, or not even people. I mean, you can buy followers, and there's a lot of bots out there, and it's just that's it's just a bit of a vanity game then at that point in terms of the numbers. So that's kind of it for my side. That gives us about 15 minutes, and I do have a little bit of time to go over into 2 o'clock. Or you can email me if there's if we don't kind of get through all the questions. But I will turn back to Michael to.
Thank you very much, Krista. I've got 2 questions queued up. The first one was from a little earlier on. There was a question about whether you had awareness or use of medium.com for blogging or long form postings.
Okay, yeah, I am familiar with them. I often read articles on there because it's a great place for kind of more long form, in-depth kind of, what journalism used to be kind of stuff. So yeah, I think if appropriate for the topic, that could be really good. The other place that I should have mentioned is the Conversation, which I think most universities across Canada have some link to it. I think our institutions all kind of pay a membership to be a part of it, and it's a similar type of thing. It tends to be very topical. So things that are happening in the news, like today, there will be articles posted tomorrow from academics on that topic. And it's, as far as I know, I saw a presentation from them a couple months ago. It's relatively easy to kind of pitch an idea to them, and once you get on their roster, if a topic in the news comes up that's in your area of research, they sometimes call on specific people. So similar to Medium, I think the Conversation Canada could be another place if you're interested in that kind of sharing that kind of content.
Thank you very much. And Charnel just wrote to say thanks as well. The second question, Krista, from Gira: research results are shared with the public after it has been peer reviewed. Should this be a caution before posting results on social media?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the type of research. and the situation. And I mean, some, as I mentioned earlier, some researchers are concerned that I say, you know, you publish your results on your blog, that publishers are gonna say that this has already been published before. I'm not sure if that's exactly true. I think it really depends on the different types of publications. Now that things are more leaning towards open access, and the very early, like oftentimes, with certain journals, you know, it doesn't take the full year or two that it used to. They sometimes put a quick, once it's been approved, they put up sort of a pre-published version on their website pretty quickly. So that might have changed the culture, but I would urge people to kind of check with your librarian. On your campus, you probably have a librarian who deals with these journals and could give you a sense of, in your discipline, in the types of journals that you're wanting to publish, what are kind of the rules around that. In terms of releasing research results and being a little bit nervous about people kind of taking those results and maybe stealing them as their own, I haven't heard too many cases of that, but you know, if it happens, that's, you know, that you can't kind of take that back. So again, I tend to be a bit more conservative about making sure that people are really, really comfortable with sharing that. And again, it will depend what those results really are. If you could talk more broadly about the results and more of a commentary on what you've found in terms of themes, as opposed to specifically like releasing the actual data. But it's something that is definitely you need to think about. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. I mean, a follow-up while you were finishing is that the risk that media twists the results.
Yeah. Yeah, that's always, unfortunately, it's always a bit of a risk. I mean, because I think media tends to be looking for sound bites and tends to like to reduce things to kind of to a sound bite, so they can take a whole article and reduce it into one sentence, and it can always be misconstrued. That's a tricky issue, because that can happen even just with not social media, but just with more traditional academic publications, or if you've been, I know people who've been interviewed by journalists, and then what actually gets released is like, that's not what I said. But so that's sort of a larger issue there.
All right, Krista, I've got 3 questions in the queue right now. So I'll go with the first one from Wallapak. What do you think about the timing of posts when it comes to research work? Also, do you have any insight on the frequency of posting? For example, I've heard that if you post more than once a day on Facebook, the algorithm considers you spam, whereas Instagram is more lenient. Just wondering if there's any difference for academic work.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know of any stats for academic work specifically. And part of the issue is that there's more of a focus on social media for, say, selling stuff. And so there's not as much literature about these types of these numbers. But I know, and it changes from time to time. I tend to try to look this up every 6 months because it does change. So I can do that again, and I'll share that with the group. But I know, yes, depending on the platform, there are better and worse times to post within the week. And some platforms, like I know Twitter will tell you when the best time to tweet is, and that just really depends on your own, like who's following you. And then others, in terms of the frequency, yeah, that does change. So I will look that up again to see what the recent ones are. But you're right. I think Facebook is more, it has generally been more kind of once or twice a week. Instagram, I think you can get away with daily, and especially with the stories now, people like that. If you want to be really active and get a good followership on Instagram, I think you have to make use of those stories at least a couple times a week. Twitter, it tends to be kind of like 3 to 5 times a day if you can do it. But yeah, I think I'll look that up and share it with people.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Spiro. How often should you measure success, And does this measure have value in light of the vanity game that we sometimes fall into?
Mm. So I think just making that measuring success a part of your routine. When I was doing the social media for Research Impact Canada, I tried to do it kind of once a month, once every 2 months, just to kind of keep an eye on where things are going. It is sometimes pretty tempting to get into that sort of that numbers game, and it gets pretty exciting when your followers go up and that. But which is, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it will also, more importantly, besides the numbers, I think doing it on a regular basis helps you catch things that are either working really well or things that aren't working. You know, everybody gets into a routine, and so you tend to maybe start sharing the same types of stuff over and over again. And if you're not looking at the analytics, you might catch that, you know what, people aren't sharing this as much as they used to. But I noticed, you know, last week I shared a picture from an event and everybody seemed to like that. So maybe we need to do more of that in the future. So I think however often you do it, I would say at least every couple of months, but just getting into the routine and the habit of checking those numbers without getting super obsessed about it and, you know, going in every day and looking at it, because that's not very healthy either.
Okay, thank you. And the final question in the queue is from Monique. What are your thoughts around websites for research projects? Should we have them or not?
Yeah, it's a good question. I still think that websites are good. They're a good sort of place to direct people. Ultimately, websites now are good for more static materials, things that aren't going to change over time. And but at the same time, people aren't going to websites like they used to and kind of trolling through them and looking and going page by page. Most people now go to Google and they look up whatever it is they want to find. They'll go to that page on someone's website. They might have a look around at a couple of other things, but then they're probably going to jump off and go to something else. So, which sounds, I don't know, it's just different than it used to be. So maybe it sounds bad, but it's not really, because it means that you don't have to have quite as much on your website as you used to. But I think you, as a researcher or as a project, you still need to have some core information. So information about who you are, maybe who your team is, a bit of your history. If you have, you know, if you've got a list of your publications, if you've got reports, it can be a place to store those documents that you're linking to. So you remember when I was talking about the Homeless Hub, their website, they still have quite a bit on there. It's still quite a large website, because they have a whole library of resources and tools. And so it's become more of websites are a bit more of a holding space for those permanent documents and resources that then you're linking people to from social media. So you can think of social media as the things that are going to change on a day-to-day basis, where your website can remain fairly static. I mean, make sure it's not out of date. Especially as researchers, you know, make sure you update your CV every couple of years. But you don't need to be kind of changing it on every couple of months, like maybe 10 years ago you wanted to, and have fresh content on your website. The fresh content goes on your social media. So if that explains it. So I still think there's a place for websites, but you know, a lot of the free tools these days, like Wix or WordPress, I think those are fine to use. You don't need to, unless you have the budget and it fits your goals, I don't think you need to be spending all kinds of money on development for these big fancy websites like we used to do.
I know Monique just commented, we were thinking of having our publications on ResearchGate, on our researchers' profiles, as the website will eventually be shut down.
Yeah. If it makes sense for your team, then I think go for it. Yeah.
Well, that is all the questions we have right now. We're approaching the top of the hour. A few minutes of found time in our calendar is probably always appreciated. On behalf of the entire network and everyone present, Krista, thank you very much for sharing this information and your experiences with us. Just so everybody knows, it will probably be about 2 to 3 weeks, and this will be shared on the researchimpact.ca website. Thank you everybody for your time. We'll be sending out information to key network contacts over the next week or two about future webinar dates. There are 2 more that are set for the winter term. Have a very safe winter, everybody, and thanks again.
Thank you. And I put my contact info up, so feel free to email me if there's something that I mentioned that you want me to share with you. And hope to see you again soon. Thanks.
Thank you.